And appreciate you coming in, and when Charlotte called and wanted me to talk about this, I've on and off for the last few years, I've had a talk kind of around this area, and so I tried to look at, in the past we have had some availability issues of when we were a couple years ago, worried if we were going to have enough corn to get through this summer and what we were going to do and talk through. And as I was starting to put this together, I mean, I'm not going to talk a lot on ingredient availability. In fact, I'm not sure we really have any true shortages of any ingredients as we look. Price may dictate whether we're going to use it or not in terms of shortage. And so what I want to focus some time on is some common ingredients. Often, certainly we recognize that well, we've always tried to figure out how to feed pigs cheaper. This is nothing new to any of us. Oftentimes, what we're trying to go against is obviously corn and soybean meal. Those are our two staple ingredients. When we balance them in a diet works pretty darn good. And given the choice, I'd feed a corn soybean meal diet any day of the week, and we'd all get along pretty well. We're living in a day where that isn't possible in many cases, and whether it's maybe you have to because you don't have alternatives that are cheap enough to feed relative to those two. But we've seen a lot of trends, and certainly I do, along with the swine side, I have some cattle background and still do a little bit of cattle nutrition work, and people always ask what's new, and I always just continue to tell them we're just trying to figure out how to feed cattle ingredients to pigs if we look at some of the fiber ingredients that we're using, and there's a lot to be done. We've learned a lot over the last few years, but certainly a lot of uncertainty, and we just try and do our best, whatever your nutrition company is or whoever you work nutrition-wise, people try and do their best to estimate how to get these ingredients fed. So I want to spend just a little bit of time on a handful of ingredients, and I'm not going to spend much time on nursery pigs today, but the one ingredient I do want to talk about is spray-dried whey. We're experiencing extremely high prices right now with that, and want to give some economics of that. Liquid fat, it's the traditional time going into summer. Producers just always have a mindset. Summer's coming. I got to look to be feeding fat now. And I think we really need to look at that mindset and how that perception has probably changed over time. Or not that we don't feed fat during the summer, but when do we maybe need to target it a little bit better in terms of these summer weights? And I'll get into that in a little bit. I do want to hit on bakery byproducts. Not all producers have this option. Some do. There's a lot of different types of bakery waste fed. And the reason I bring that up is there's some book values out there that really aren't very representative of the actual bakery that's being sold today. And so the reason I'm going to touch on that quick is if we use traditional book values, we're way over going to value bakery in a lot of cases. Again, not every producer has that available, but a lot do. And so I wanted to hit on that. And then the whole distiller issue, we're going to talk about some of the reduced oil, the oil extraction that's going on, and then talk just a little bit on some feed processing and run through some current diets and current prices from this week to see where we're at in terms of some of these alternatives. So to know where we are today, I think it's good to know where we've been. And I went back and found prices from a common feed mill here in central Iowa that I get prices on, and went back to the first week in June over the last 4 years, including this year would be here this week or roughly. And so there's certainly variance around this from the different parts of the country, but try to get as common as possible. Interestingly, if we look back at corn, we've kind of been on the roller coaster there of $4, $3, and if we'd go back further, we could see the same trend. A year ago at $7.25, worried if we're going to have enough corn to get through the summer, and then here we're at $6. Interestingly, soybean meal is one that we've had a lot of variation. Actually, last fall, soybean meal was very reasonable, and now it's about almost doubled in price if we look at where the future boards were to compare to today. I still want to find the economist that told me last November, don't buy soybean meal, it's going to even get cheaper, and it's doubled in price. That's the difference between nutritionists and economists. Economists will never pass out their slides because they never want it in print. Nutritionists will just report what actually is happening. So it's kind of like veterinarians and nutritionists. You know, I like to be a vet, and a vet likes to be a nutritionist. We're not sure we're doing the right thing there. So distillers, this is the one I'm going to spend a little bit of time on. And again, I just don't want to, the last thing that you guys came to hear is another distillers talk, and that's the last thing I want to give. But I think it is important. I want to go through quite a bit of economics on distillers, because distillers today is not even, it's still economical to use, but not even anywhere close to where we were a year ago. And so I'm going to go through some of those examples and look at the price, how that's bounced, but we're sitting at about $240 a ton at $6 corn versus last year at $7.25 corn and $200 distillers. I don't have to run many economic things to show you that it's not as economical today. And we're going to look at that. Fat price has kind of bounced around, but kind of been around that 50-cent mark over this last year. Dried whey, look at this. For our nursery pigs, back in 2009, dried whey was about 24 cents. And I actually looked at a couple different mills because I didn't think that was right. My memory, a lot of times I can't remember what I ate for breakfast anymore, let alone 4 years ago. And say, man, was it really 24 cents? And it was. I looked at a couple different mill sheets from back at that time. And look what happened to whey. We've tripled the price of whey for those nursery pigs. And so again, as we look at nursery diet costs, not only have our other ingredients went up, our lactose sources, and this is whey, but this would be whey permeate, other different types of lactose sources, they've run up as well. And then lysine has bounced around. Our synthetic lysine source went up, but again, moderate and not a lot of changes over time. So let's review spray-dried whey. Spray-dried whey we feed primarily as a lactose source. It's a highly digestible protein source for our starter pigs. So generally we just feed whey. So in your starter pellet diet, there's always a lactose source in that. Generally whey permeate or spray-dried whey. And then we generally feed a lactose source in that first grind and mix diet up to the time the pigs are about 25 pounds of body weight. At that point, we change them to a corn soy-based diet with no lactose. So in this trial, some work we did at K-State, there's lots of lactose trials done. Here we fed, 7 different sources of spray-dried whey compared to a diet that didn't have any. These pigs, this was 5 days after weaning for 14 days. And as you would expect, average daily gain, pigs fed any of the sources had improved numerical over the control, and that's why we feed lactose. Pigs do better. Now, there's big variation in quality of lactose sources, and I don't want to get into that today, but I guess what I want to show is there certainly is differences, but this is why we do feed lactose. Pigs do better. It's a good thing, and that's why we do it. If we take whey at 40 cents a pound, and generally, there's 250 pounds of whey in this diet. If we look at a margin over feed, so this is valuing the gain and putting it on a market price, and basically for this, use 65 cents a pound, which is about the live price relative to a $90 carcass weight. That's what I did for this comparison. And you'll see if you value the weight relative to feed costs, so that extra revenue from having a heavier pig at the end of the nursery into this period, in every case, regardless of source, well, this one here is basically break even, but they're all economical, break even at the worst. So that's why we feed lactose. Think back 4 years ago, it was 24 cents. They're all really highly economical. Let's go to today at 75 cents, which is the price this week. In this case, a couple of those where we had really good performance, it's still economical. In the cases where we had these 5 that were lower performing, still performed better than the control. Remember, they all did better, just different levels. If I have one of these sources, actually it's sending me backwards. Or what we're saying here is the pigs still gain more weight, but the feed cost now is greater than the weight advantage of the economics of that weight. Now, is our recommendation to go pull whey? No. Some producers have really cut back. Some producers have taken whey out. But people are also scared to death to do that because if the pigs slow down, worried about other disease challenges in commercial settings. So that's not the message, is don't feed whey. The message is whey economics is extremely tight right now. It looks like, looking at whey futures for the fall, that the price of whey will ease back down into the 60s, maybe high 50s, but it's still going to be high. And so the one thing that we can do as producers, if we're still going to use these lactose sources, is not over budget. If we feed more than what our budget is for these diets, that's what kills us. So if we're on a lot of these diets at first grind and mixed, it's somewhere between 10 to 15 pound budget. If you're feeding 20 pounds, that's a lot of extra dollars that you're not going to get a benefit from. There's a number of people that will feed lactose to those pigs that are over 30 pounds. Okay? You can get a growth performance benefit by feeding it longer than 25 pounds, but it's not, at least in all of our work, it's not economical. That's why we shut it off at 25 pounds. Once that pig hits at its guts, more advanced, it can digest soybean meal at a higher rate. It doesn't need that lactose for that growth benefit. Again, it depends on your feeding program. There's a lot of different recommendations. At least ours is no way should a pig over 25 pounds. And a lot of people ended at 23 pounds when they go on that first diet without lactose. Okay. What about fat? This is where our energy, in a corn soy diet, we have a moderate energy, we have a good energy diet relative to a lot of other places in the world. But traditionally, we've fed a lot of fat. If we'd go back 10 years, many producers would feed 4 to 5% fat in every finishing ration all the way through. Fat was 15 cents, 18 cents, maybe 20 cents. If it got over 20 cents, we thought the world was coming to an end, okay? Well, now we're dealing with fat that hovers around 50 cents a pound. And while corns went up, fat has too. But generally that relationship of, since corn's more expensive, say, man, fat, we should be able to feed more. Well, the problem is fat went up at a greater percent, and in most cases, fat's not economical to use many times of the year. And that's why many diets no longer contain it. And if we look at, and there's different, again, there's about 15 different commercial trials in a little spreadsheet that we've put together to show the response. We put the feed prices in. And this is what it shows. And I'm going to use these same values of $6 corn, $400 soybean meal, 46-cent fat for the remainder of the experiment, $90 carcass price. At least it shows to us today that it's only economical to use fat in the Finisher 1 and Finisher 2 diets, or basically up to the pigs are about 120 pounds of body weight. After that, there's a growth benefit, but it's not economical to do that given the dollar or the revenue that you can get back. Now, this is a perfect time of year, though, that producers are, if it gets hot, if we turn hot and it starts to get over 100 degrees for a couple of weeks, what's going to happen to all of our market weights? They're going to go down. So our first reaction is to dump in fat because there's more energy. If the pigs are eating less, they don't have the appetite, they're going to eat less, we get more energy into them, we can recover some of that. But it's back to, is that weight worth the dollars of that added fat? And that answer is very complicated because it depends on the situation of yourself. What's my weight window? When do I hit a sort loss? All those things with your packer, they maybe make this, it's not just an easy answer, yes or no. But a lot of times where fat price has been relative to corn, we can no longer feed high levels continuous unless there's other situations to come in. And so again, it's back to when do we feed fat? Traditionally, and again, I think of how many times I've worked with producers and it hits June or we get in the middle of June. Now I need to dump fat into all the pig diets. And that's, in my mind, that's not right. For pigs that are going to start to be marketed here in June and July, or we get into July and August, when should have those pigs actually been started to get fat? It's not when it turns hot and their feed intake goes down. When's our growth rate highest in pigs? If we look at this calendar year so far, from January to now, when's growth rate going to be highest in pigs? It's not here in June, it's earlier this year. In our winter months when it's cool, or when pigs that are going to be marketed in July and August, and those are generally the highest net revenue, net margin pigs that we market all year long. Those are the ones we need to wait on because market price is the highest. When do they start to need fat? They needed it back in March when they got placed to really start cranking them, all right? To start getting the weight on early so when it gets hot, we're already ahead of the game. Trying to play catch up with added fat, we don't get the full benefit because their feed intake is going to be lower regardless. So if we can get that growth rate a little earlier, get them to where we need to be, and then, so it depends. Now, pigs that were placed in this month, what month are they going to be marketed in? So 50-pound pigs going to the finisher, when are we going to market them? What month? September, October, we get into the, when does pig growth rate always generally rocket ahead of us? And not always, but a lot of times we're behind getting pigs out the door. October, pretty good month that happens. Well, then for pigs being placed here in July, that are going to be marketed October, there's not a big incentive to start dumping fat in those diets because they're going to catch up once it cools off. Their growth rate will be hurt during the summer, but generally they catch up. And we get behind in marketing those in the fall in a lot of cases. Not every year, but in a lot of cases we do. So make sure we're spending the money on fat on the pigs that need it. The summer marketed pigs that are placed in March through now or April through now, the pigs being placed now, they necessarily don't need the high levels of fat just because of the standpoint of when they're marketed. So it's more of thinking that reactive approach and not just it's June, we got to dump fat in all the pigs' diets. Because the economics there don't make sense to me. Okay? You may argue that, but at least that's my thinking on it. Dust control. This is one thing that's really went by the wayside, but I am still, again, you're getting the bias of Joel DeRouchey, still shocked of how much dust control is used in our industry by different producers. I'll be the first to admit there is nothing worse than walking a barn full of dust. And if we put in 1% added fat, we knock that dust down highly, without question. Okay? But with 46% fat, we would get a slight improvement in feed efficiency. And even if we account for that over the entire finishing period, at least the economics and the way we value fat at K-State, it would still cost me over $1 a pig for dust control. And again, that's back to not getting as big of benefit in late finishing when they're consuming a majority of that feed. So again, that's an employee and management decision if you're going to use any sort of dust control. Again, if you do, we really need to minimize it, and there's a huge cost in there. And there's a difference there. If you're a contract grower, you love dust control. If you're an owner paying the feed bill, you may not like it as much. Okay, so we get into those discussions. And summer versus winter as well. How closed the barns are versus how much they're open. That certainly plays a role of the quality of air inside the barn as well. All right. I said I wanted to touch on bakery a little bit, and I guess the reason I did over the last few weeks been seeing more analysis, and as we try to value bakery, bakery can be a really good product. I mean, this is no secret that we've been using bakery in the swine industry for a long time. It can be in a lot of different forms of different wheat products, the pastas, the cakes, cookies, crackers, everything ground up, candy, repackaged, put together. A really good energy source. All right, as you'd expect, a lot of pigs like the taste of it, highly palatable, sugar, some good salt, some salt in there that'll stimulate some feed intake at times. If we account, maybe do balance our diets for salt correctly. We always got to watch that because of the high salt level. Because it's kind of like back to giving pigs a heart attack. So what do? We put all this salt in our human food. We call it scraps because we can't then get it into our human food, and then we feed it to pigs and worry about the salt content. Isn't that a kind of a sign of the times when we're worried about salt content in our diets when we're feeding human food? Okay, I find a little irony in that. So, but anyway, good energy source. But how do we value it? If we go to the NRC in '98, there's a new National Research Council publication coming out this summer. I'll be interested to see what the new values for a lot of our ingredients are on the update. But if we go back to the NRC, which is the standard book value that's used as a starting reference if you don't have an analysis, 11.5, just over 11% fat, and on an energy basis, 8% greater than corn. Good energy source. Okay? It's higher fat, we have more calories. However, many bakery products actually contain lower levels of fat than book values. If you look at a lot of different, from Indira's, many different places that it comes from in different mills, a lot of fat level is 7 to 10% is pretty typical, which is lower than the 11, which as you take fat out, what happens to energy? Has to go down. For feeding less fat, energy generally goes down. In fact, this last 2 weeks ago, there was a bunch of bakery coming into a commercial mill that we were looking at, and its consistent fat level was 6.4%, and it was actually a 92% energy value of corn. So this is back to knowing what we're feeding And bakery is, I think, a prime example of there can be really good value in that for some producers if you can get it, but we got to value it correctly. Because if we're using a value up here that's 8% greater than corn, and it's actually 8% less, that obviously we have something going on wrong. So we got to value this stuff correctly. And I guess I use this as an example for any ingredient, and we'll get into the distillers and the de-oiled product, but again, reinforce the fact we got to know what we're feeding. All right. So, because we're talking ingredients, I guess we got to talk distillers, even though I always get tired of talking distillers, but it's a very, obviously a common ingredient. It's something that is rare that we haven't fed it. If you haven't fed it, there's probably different reasons why, a kind of a common ingredient that we use now. But the economics have sure changed on it. If we look at today's prices, again, roughly today's prices, $6 corn, $400 soybean meal, $2.40 distillers, and I will clarify that this is using the traditional product, 10-11% fat. Okay, so this is not oil extracted. I'll get to that in a couple slides. So this would be if we had the full fat product. Right now, distillers is about 112% of corn. All right? It's probably one of the higher percentages in terms of being a higher price than corn than we've seen in some time. Last winter it got there a little bit. But again, as we look at the value, and what we have here is the diet cost savings at 10 up to 40%, and then the feed cost savings per pig, and that's what here's in the red. So ultimately, I know there's a lot of numbers, and on the handout, there's this calculator that's on our website, and I'll show you where to go to get it. But basically, if I fed 10% distillers today, I save about $1.71 per pig. If I fed that level from 50 pounds to market, okay? So this does not intake a step down that many producers do utilize at the end, but just if we fed that flat level. All the way up to 30 is about $2.37. So incrementally, it's still economical. But let's go to the next slide. This is the slide I used last year at this same talk of corn. When it's 7 1/4, it's actually higher priced corn, cheaper distillers. The ratio is 77%. And look here, just saved just over $8 a pig with distiller grains a year ago at 30% of the diet. Today, it's just over $2, $2.30. Okay? The economics of distillers has dramatically decreased. Again, these are both the full-fat traditional product. And so as we look at distillers, producers now, and decisions we're making, okay, so if we had the full-fat product, and let's just stay with that, and that's going away by the wayside pretty quick, at what level do we choose here? It's still economical to use, but is it worth feeding the higher levels for those incremental savings if growth performance is jeopardized in pit issues, all those things? So again, we see certainly pullback in use of distiller grains from the high levels we saw a year ago. Okay, so the next few slides I've taken was part, and there's others in the room here that were part of, there was an oil extraction conference after the Midwest meetings. I pulled a few things from the executive summary that Rob Musser of NutriQuest put together. And I guess just to understand where we're heading with the ethanol industry is approximately 50% of the ethanol plants are extracting, and that's as of March. And it's expected to grow by 80 to up to 80% by the end of this calendar year. So the distiller grains we've worked with in the past is not going to be the distiller grains that we're working with in the future. And part of this has to do with they're simply pulling the oil back out. And again, it's about they estimate about a $3 million investment. They can pay for it in 3 to 4 months. And it's a no-brainer. If I'm an ethanol plant and I'm selling fat, choice white grease is in that 46 to 50 cent range, all right? So I don't know what they're truly getting for this fat product out the backside, but let's say it's in the 35 to 40 cent range for this crude corn oil. Distiller grains is priced at 11 cents a pound. Fats at the minimum 30 cents a pound, probably more than that. That's why they're doing it. They're in a business just like we are on the pig side. I certainly don't begrudge them for doing it. I don't like it. Because now we've taken a product that we somewhat started to understand how to feed, and now we got products where this fat level is going to be a little bit all over the board. And in fact, the fat level could go down as low as 5 to 9, majority are going to pull out 2 to 3% fat is what they've indicated. So again, how do we know what we're getting in terms of right now at our mills? There's a lot of confusion in terms of what's coming into mills, what it actually and what the value of that is. And if we go back a slide on full fat distillers, where 30% was worth about $2.37 of savings. Now if we inlay a product that's lower oil, so if it's lower oil, what just happened to the energy value? Went down, we pull energy, we pull oil, less calories. And now there's certainly some debate of what that energy value is, but logically we know it's going down some. Okay? So Jerry Sherson, Brian Kerr, good researchers, they present some work that they did with a bunch of this product. And basically for every 1% oil reduces the ME 30 to 50 kcals per kilogram. And again, just divide that by 2.2 to get on a pound basis. I just took this from the summer. I didn't want to change that information they provided, so it is in kilograms. Basically that there's particle size, as you'd expect, does influence it. There's been a little bit of work done, a little mixed research, but in their research showed that if the distiller's particle size is reduced, there's more calories. Just like if we reduce corn particle size, we get more calories. And so we have that. But again, there's a lot of debate in terms of what that energy level should be and how best to predict it. They came up with some nice equations, but again, there's more work going on to help verify some of that. And so as we look at some more information from 2002 to present, the variation of distillers is increased. And again, the plant-to-plant variation, the different manufacturers, what their goals are. Now we're pulling fat at different levels. We got all over the board of what this product is. And so this is where, and again, we talk about it. Producers adopt it, some don't. But I don't care what size you are. We're beyond the point now of not knowing what the analysis are, having good confidence of what that ingredient is. So whether it's distillers, whether it's wheat midds, soy hulls, whatever, bakery, whatever alternatives, we have got to do a better job as producers, regardless of size, of knowing the value of that. Because we can be overvaluing some of these products way too much. Distillers is a good example if we're not on top right now and going forward of what distillers product is coming into the feed mill that's coming back into the pigs. We don't want to be overvaluing that product. That wasn't a good news story. I didn't mean to get that negative, but we're in a situation where we got to know what it is, and it's changing. And again, as we look at what the product is and how to value it, this product is new enough that there's not a lot of great calculators and different things out. Easy to use producer tools; those are going to get developed here. But we just got to be aware so we can value that correctly, and then look at the levels in the diet. Now, in many cases for producers, the reduced oil product still is economical, but it's less. And so then it's back to how much should I feed or should I feed it? Is it worth having that alternative in the diet? And it's just not distillers. It could be wheat midds or whatever else. We always have to make that decision of how much do we need to save before I want to mess with this other ingredient. That's where we come back. So again, as we look at a couple quick management things, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I guess I'm from K-State, so I can't have a talk without particle size. Part of it is it's so important. I think most of you understand how important particle size is. But grinding that grain down finer to let that pig be able to digest, wrap those digestive enzymes once it hits the gut around more particles to get better digestion. It's like just why we chew food. It's just chewing it up more before the pig eats it through grinding or rolling. And again, very predictably in most cases, for every 100 micron change, feed efficiency will improve by 1.2%. So if we're looking at 7 pounds less of feed for every 100 microns, again, just short of $1 a pig by doing a better job of grinding. So going from 700 to 600. Many producers have looked at, or now we see more, even regional toll mills grinding to 500. And as we found is why we can run into flowability issues the finer that we get it. But one thing that we have going for us is before when we would grind feed fine and we'd have added fat, that's when we're going to clog bins, okay? Added fat is sticky, choice white or whatever ingredient's tacky. That really plays a bigger role than fine grind particles. We can fine grind a diet that doesn't have added fat, and again, we can have certainly flowability issues, but that's where we're trying to find the sweet spot of what will flow and what won't. And so as we look at particle size, it becomes very important. We have a bunch of work going on now of fine grinding whole diets, fine grinding wheat mids, fine grinding distillers, repelleting that. It looks like if you regrind the whole diet to 350 roughly, pigs don't like the taste of powder, as you probably expect. You can get it all too fine. That's why in cases where if we just grind the corn fine and feed it with distillers, soybean meal, where it's all not fine, we get along. But we're looking at post-grind. I tell you what, if you grind the whole diet and pellet it, we're just closing a trial out right now, a pork board funded study. It's that new fashion. Actually, the first pigs are going out today on the first top. You can fine grind a 50% byproduct diet and fine grind the whole thing, pellet it, and bring them back to some really nice performance. And so this is back to evaluating, and I'm going to get to pelleting here. I think that's on the next slide. But pelleting is, we need to really look at the feed efficiency advantages. Can we take a diet that's lower cost, process it better, and get equal performance back to a corn-soy diet? Those are the questions that we need to really look at. Again, for most people, pellet mills aren't available. A lot of our regional mills don't have pellet mills. But as we go forward and we're feeding lower energy diets, we get more questions all the time about pelleting. When can I economically justify it? All those things. I think we're going to see more pelleting. Now, how much more? I don't know. But I think we're going to see more pelleting certainly be looked at. Okay? And this is back to pelleting. There's a lot of different data out there. In the typical pelleting response, these are both in the commercial finishing barn. On average daily gain, we generally expect a 5 to 7% improvement in average daily gain. On feed efficiency, generally 5 to 6. You'll see in this study, experiment 2, it's lower in both cases. The reason we attribute to that is pellet quality. If we get fines, a higher fine level, so we make a pellet, but we make a crappy one, and it turns into a bunch of fines, okay? One of the big reasons that some of our largest producers today pellet, it's because they grind the corn really, really fine and pellet it. Even though we're making a poor quality pellet, we're getting the particle size benefit. If we can make a better pellet in a lot of cases, we will get these full improvements. In this case, this feed efficiency was only slightly improved. We've done 3 follow-up studies to this that we're going to be coming out with, where if we have fine levels, or 30% or 35% of the diet's actual fines, we get no improvement. In fact, we can send it negative because of the wasting and the sorting that occurs. So if we're going to pellet, we need a good quality pellet to get these benefits, or if we're going to get the benefit of particle size reduction, then some don't care about pellet quality. However, I'd say if we can do both, and that's easier said than done on a big commercial basis where our throughput is flying like crazy. So again, things that we got to work through in those cases. Okay. A lot of equipment here. As we walk through, there's all the different types of equipment. One of the feeder types that we've worked with, actually we just, over the last 4 years, we've done, I think, 16 different trials with comparing dry and wet dry feeders in a commercial environment. And this is actually some data that's going to be presented this summer. I took this out of Seremus's presentation, so maybe I'm going to be in trouble for presenting this early. But basically, and I apologize, this is in kilos because I want to keep the data in its integrity. But basically looking at wet-dry feeders versus dry. And on initial weight, the same. And look at here. This is on a kilo basis, about 3 kilos. So again, about 7 pounds heavier in the same fixed time we get with a wet-dry versus a dry feeder. Part of that is we have the water source right with. Average daily gain goes up. Feed intake goes up. But no differences in feed efficiency. Look at that, absolutely identical over those amount of trials. The one thing we do find, though, in these cases, again, we'll have higher hot carcass weight, but these pigs are also fatter. They had nothing on loin eye, but percent lean is lower. The one thing I'd quantify on these studies is we kill them on a fixed day. Recognize in a lot of commercial settings, if we got that 6 pounds or 7 pounds more in that same period of time, you're simply marketing them faster. because they're bigger, they're hitting your weight. Now, whether these pigs were fed another 4 or 5 days, 3 days to catch up, would they still have these same carcass characteristics? Probably not from a fat standpoint, because this has all been balanced and covariated. So those pigs are truly fat. They're actually eating more than what their body could lay down in protein. But here's a tool back to the economics. A lot of our margin over economics would say they're actually about equal. Some cases better, some cases worse. But from a growth rate standpoint, there's no question a wet dry can do us better. So this is back to individual decisions and producers. How tight am I on space? How can I utilize different technologies? Here's one outside of feed that we know pigs will grow faster using them. Now, whether it's economical in your system or not is another question. But there is some potential advantages that could potentially be looked at by different producers in these commercial settings with those feeders. So I want to wrap up here in the next couple minutes just looking at some diets put together. Again, this is going to be, I'm just going to show some diet examples. This is a middle finisher diet, 125 to 170 pounds of body weight. So that's what we're going to look at from a formulation and cost standpoint. Again, $6 corn, 400 soybean meal, $240 DDGS, $200 a ton mids, meat and bone meal at just $5.67, and then Monacal and L-lysine. I know there's a lot on here. Basically what I want you to show is a normal. Well, I guess I'm not sure what normal, this is probably the old normal, I should have termed it. Corn, soy with 3 pounds of synthetic lysine. Oh gosh, I remember those days, weren't they nice? Okay, so this is would be our most simplistic diet. Have a higher amino acid diet where we're putting higher levels of synthetic amino acids, which is very commonly done. Meat and bone meal is a potential alternative. 30% distiller grains, 20% wheat mids, or both 30% distillers, 20% wheat mids. And there's different things with the formula. You can see we can really use higher levels of synthetic amino acids when we go to these potential byproducts. In fact, when we use meat and bone meal, look, we don't need any supplemental phosphorus. We combine distillers and mids. We need no supplemental phosphorus in those. Both highly digestible phosphorus sources are mids and distillers. And again, these diets are balanced on an equal lysine-calorie ratio where I know that wheat mids are lower energy, but I'm assuming fat's not economical in this scenario, and I'm not adding fat back in. So I'm going to take into account a lower or poor feed to gain with wheat mids. So here's these same diets. That's the same information that was on. Down here is the actual diet cost for this diet. Again, this is 125 to 170 pounds, $15 grind mix delivery charge added in. On a feed budget standpoint, feed budget goes up when we add wheat mids because it's lower energy. It takes more feed to get the same amount of gain. And if we look across at these dollar amounts, and so this is just for this phase, you'll still see that distillers, and again this is the traditional distillers, full fat, is still the most economical in this case. Wheat mids, again comparing back to our corn soy, some economics, we combine and we even get a further benefit. So again, the message is, alternatives can still be economical. It depends on how you formulate. If you came back and added fat to these diets to get to the same energy value, which a lot of people would, that does change this, and then a lot of times they'll become less economical because fat is more expensive to add back in. If you're on fixed time and going to have to sell a lighter pig, then you have to take into account that less revenue. I just wanted to show an example of the actual feed cost to feed during that phase. We could take it a lot more complex. I just wanted to show some of these differences. Alternatives are still economical, but we need to make sure we value them correctly in these given cases. When it comes to feed costs, we can make it pretty complex, even though we don't want it to be. There's a lot of things that go in. High feed disappearance makes feed efficiency worse, which feed costs will go up. Low average daily gain, other factors in the feed processing. We need to make sure we have our list of things that we're not doing wrong. A lot of times we do a lot of things really good, but all the other things we need to at least be average, right? We can't be great at things and be way below average in other things and expect to be moving forward. It's a complete program, and those are all the different things that we've put together that can influence it. And certainly there's probably others that you can think of as well. There's a lot of different resources. Pork Board has passed out some of those different publications. There's a lot of different calculators. At our ksuswine.org, we've worked on a number of different price break-even calculators, a lot of particle size, some marketing calculators, feeding sow tools. And again, a lot of different information there, and I can follow up with you afterwards too if you have questions.